winning 90% of your new business because you have some sort of incredible value.
I'm going to take a bit of a different angle.
We got a budget this big. I'm going to give it to you because you have a really killer plan.
You give a Red Bull to a turtle, what do you expect?
I think that's a dead turtle. So let's move on to...
E-Rig.
Cheers.
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 Does your current premium finance company lock you into long-term agreements? That's because they don't want you talking to us. At IFS, we win your business the good old-fashioned way, with customer service. I know you don't always have to use a premium finance company, but when you do, you should use IFS. Cheers.
Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Digital Insurance Pint podcast. I'm your host, Tom Reed, and as always, I'm joined by my colleagues, Steve Earle, CEO of Cheap Insurance.
Hello.
Jeff Roy, CEO of Excalibur Insurance.
Hey, Pinters.
And Adam Mitchell, CEO of Mitch Insurance.
Hello.
And today we're very pleased to be joined by Sean Antao. He is a partner at EY and leads the insurance technology consulting arm. Sean, thanks very much for joining us.
Great, happy to be here.
And as always, we're going to get Jeff to delve into the personal side of Sean with the most intriguing and important questions that you'll ever hear. Jeff?
We'll get things kicked off here. Sean, what's your favorite Canadian band or artist?
My favorite Canadian band or artist, I'm going to have to go, and this is probably showing my age, is Our Lady Peace.
If you could see a concert live in 2024, who would you go see and where would you see them?
It's probably going to have to be at the Budweiser Stadium, or if that's what they still call it right now. But to actually see an artist, it's a good one. You know, you're probably going to laugh at me, but Fleetwood Mac would probably be the ones I want to see.
No laugh. That's
right.
Awesome.
Because I got to cater to my wife as well, and she's a big Fleetwood Mac fan, and not so much Our Lady Peace. So that'd be the one.
Now, are you an iPhone or an Android user?
Unfortunately, I'm an Android, and I can tell by your reactions, everyone here is an
first
one ever. That's what I was going to guess. iPhone. So you stumped the panel here. Well done. What are one or two apps you can't live without on your phone, or what do you use the most?
Probably WhatsApp and shamefully Instagram.
Now, leaders are readers, and they're always trying to be lifelong learners. Maybe share with our listeners some of the podcasts you like to listen to when you're driving, or any great books that you've read over the last year that you thought were awesome.
You know, I've probably, in terms of podcasts, you know, again, don't shame me for this, but Joe Rogan always keeps me entertained or keeps me awake.
Last question on the get to know Sean part. You can go on a vacation in 2024 with your family. Where would you go?
I got 3 kids, 6, 4, and 2. So I got to go to a place where there's a water park and there's unlimited food. So probably someplace down south. We typically go to Jamaica every October.
As always, thank you to IFS Premium Finance. We wouldn't be able to put this show on without you guys. Thank you very much.
Nice. Great spot. Okay, we're going to jump in here. The listeners just want to know a bit more about you, Sean. So maybe run by how you ended up in the position you're in right now.
Yeah, so funny enough, you know, I don't think any kid that's in high school or going into university, they say that they're going to get into the insurance sector, right? It's just not something that's sexy in that sense, right? But coming out of high school, you know, I'm good at math, I'm good at physics, sciences, along those lines. So, of course, my parents said, well, you got to either be a doctor, lawyer, or engineer, right? So I went down the engineering path. Went to U of T, did my comp engineering there for 4 years. And then truthfully, coming out of school, like the market was kind of slow. So this was like 2004, 2005. And my first job out of school was actually working for the Chrysler, at one of the assembly plants in Brampton. And that was just to kind of tie me over, you know, pay for my drinks, pay for my outings and whatnot. But shortly after that, I got into a small consulting firm that didn't really specialize in a specific sector. They did a bit of retail, telco, financial services. So that kind of got my feet wet in terms of different technology stacks, different, user experience, back-end development. So I did that for about a couple of years. And then, a couple of friends moved over to a small software company, actually a competitor of Guidewire at the time, no longer a firm. So Chameleon Solutions, they were founded out in Markham. And so that's kind of how I got my intro into insurance and technology related to insurance. So I did that for about a couple of years. EY was starting off their own insurance practice in 2012, focusing on Guidewire, as Guidewire was, really crossing the border and making waves in the Canadian market. And then joined EY in 2012, and about 10, 12 years later, here I am, partner, leading our insurance technology practice with Guidewire at its core.
Well, speaking of EY, so EY is generally, as it relates to Guidewire, is generally termed a system integrator, which if you're a technology person is probably relatively, straightforward, but not everybody knows what a system integrator is. Can you basically talk about what a system integrator does and how EY fulfills that role for the insurance sector with Guidewire?
I guess the best analogy, and kind of continuing the conversation from earlier, in terms of, when you're doing a home renovation, you typically either, hire the trades yourselves or you go with a general contractor, right? So think of a system integrator like a general contractor for insurance organizations, where they're ultimately responsible for partnering with the client or a vendor or both to develop, implement an actual core system replacement, right? So we would partner with those clients to capture their requirements, develop out the configurations, test it, and then take it go live. And, one of the strengths there is certainly, our ability to scale, our experiences to fulfill some of those capacity needs that a client wouldn't ordinarily to be able to do so on their own.
Quick follow-up question. Of the Guidewire implementations that you're familiar with, what percentage would you say EY is participating in?
So I can't say an actual percentage. I think, if you look at more globally, we're probably number 1 or 2 in the world. We've probably done over 300 plus Guidewire implementations, specifically in the Canadian market. Again, we're number 1 and 2 here as well. And we've done probably about 15 implementations or 15 unique clients that we've delivered Guidewire for.
So Guidewire seems to be the admin system of choice. It's kind of kicking butt in the Canadian market. Everybody seems to be flocking over to Guidewire. Why is that? Why are you guys dominating? Why are insurance finding it to be the only solution?
Guidewire, I guess, founded in the early 2000s. This is while I was at that company I mentioned before, Chameleon Solutions. So we were, not going head to head. There was Guidewire, there's OneShield, Chameleon, Duck Creek. There was a number of competitors in the market space in the early 2000s. But I think that the value proposition and the focus of Guidewire is what allowed them to dominate the market, especially in North America. They focused on putting out a rock solid claims platform, and that was their claim to fame in the 2000s and early 2010s, right? And so by building a strong and a core platform around claims, they were able to develop market share, and then they got into the policy and billing sphere of things probably around 2010, which allows them to capitalize on existing client base, but also expand to the market. And so, they're making billions of dollars in investments. More recently, they've actually taken their on-prem solution and moved it to a cloud offering, which most clients now that are on-prem are looking to migrate to that cloud service. And, in the Canadian market alone, I think they represent 85 to 90% of the direct written premium for P&C insurers in Canada. And it's really kind of that strategy of kind of being best in class for different areas of the insurance value chain that has allowed them to grow that market share pretty quickly in the Canadian market. Down south in the US and more broadly across the Atlantic, probably slightly different story, but Guidewire is the system of choice for most P&C insurers.
Wow. I knew it was dominant. I didn't realize it was like 85 or 90% dominant.
Yeah.
That's
If you look at, and just to clarify that's based on direct written premium, right? So if you look at it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. No, understood. It's not 85, 90% of the companies. They've got the biggest companies, which make up, 85 or 90%.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of billions of dollars of investments, why is it that some insurance companies seem to have a massive spend on this implementation and some have a relative tiny spend? I mean,
it's a good question. let's be honest, right? Like insurance companies are not first movers. You still can walk into any insurance company. They're still on the mainframe screens. They haven't changed things in, 3 or 4 decades. But when you look at, companies that were early adopters of Guidewire, again, a US-based company, there was a lot of work that had to be done in terms of rationalizing their products and developing the Canadian content, right? And so some of the early adopters or movers onto the Guidewire platform, they were building out this content for the first time. Some of the more recent implementations, they're benefiting from those investments that were made by the earlier carriers. Once they, especially in the Canadian market where, you've got auto that's regulated across all the provinces, everyone more or less has to operate the same in those regulated lines. So once you've built it once for one carrier, people are able to take that, put that onto a place like Guidewire Marketplace, and others can benefit from some of those earlier investments. So it really is, the size and scale of the organization. Like if you look at a tier one company that's, serving, billions of dollars in direct written premium, they're certainly going to pay a lot more for a Guidewire implementation because they have to build a solution that's probably a bit more complex and can scale to the masses. Versus if you look at some of the more smaller tier 3, tier 4, they don't have the tens of millions of dollars to invest in a core system replacement, right? So they're going to benefit more from some of the stock pre-built components, the product definitions, the integrations, and the reports. And that's why you could see an implementation that costs $2 to $3 million, other implementations that could cost, $100 million.
And are there some that are just fully custom build compared to, I've heard of other small mutuals taking a cloud solution, which might be what you were saying, it's more out of the box.
I think prior to cloud, I think a lot of carriers, because they didn't have some of that pre-built content, there was a lot of customization that they were built into the platform. And for, in some instances, it was good reason, right? It was a capability that they had to have to satisfy either their internal needs or their brokers. In other instances, it was just a capability that wasn't available in the Canadian market. So, if you look at some of the more historical implementations, you're probably going to see a lot more customization to the base platform, which in more recent years, Guidewire has taken some of those learnings and some of those capabilities and actually included it as part of the platform itself.
Great. So I'm hearing a lot about these benefits to the carriers, about going to Guidewire and using EY to do that. I'm looking for benefits to brokers and distribution. So how do you incorporate broker workflows and outcomes to the broker, whether it's adding a step or taking away a step insofar as your implementations?
So I think it's an area that, there's been a lot of focus on, as carriers are looking to grow market share and really deliver not only a good customer experience for their direct line, but also a great broker experience. And so ultimately brokers want to do as little as possible, right? So I'm going to not pitch anything portals related, but what we've done is really focus on the API integration so that brokers can start and stop in the same application, right? So whether that's an Applied or Power Broker, Keel, or any one of those platforms, it's building that direct API integration between those platforms and the core platform with the insurance carrier so that they can start and stop directly in that system, right? We know that there are limitations with some of the broker management systems in terms of, some of the analytics and some of the data capture that they can provide. So we need to augment that. I'm not going to say the bad word of portals, but, in some areas where there needs to be additional data capture, we're working with many of these broker management systems to expand those capabilities so that they can include and offer more product offerings on their platform.
Question, just to jump in there, any reason why those companies wouldn't go the standards route and actually, instead of trying to build a portal and ask their $1 million question, say, hey, let's go to CZO, let's get the standards baked in there? Did they ever do that, or they just don't want to be bothered?
No, I think most of them are actually going down the CZO route more recently, Jeff. I think when we look at all of the broker integrations that we've built to date over the last 5 years, we're all using the CZO standard, and Guidewire as itself, they're investing quite a bit in terms of making those APIs CZO compliant so that, you're not working with different formats as defined by the carrier. Everyone's following that consistent standard. The challenge there, though, is some of those platforms, the ones that haven't upgraded more recently, they're still stuck with maybe some of those legacy APIs that don't follow the relevant standards, in which case you either have to rebuild or replatform those APIs, or look at some sort of middleware component to support those interactions.
So on that subject, a CSIO implementation can look quite different depending on who's building it, right? So given that Guidewire has such a significant market share and that you're the leading integrator of that software, are you guys making these API connections the same way from carrier A to B to C to D?
All of them, Tom, are pretty much standardized. I mean, that's what allows you, I think, Adam, you were asking the question, right? Like, how are the costs different from one carrier to the other? And so by standardizing these APIs and making sure that the insurance carriers follow these standards allows us to accelerate the implementation. If they ask, that's where we put in some of the lessons learned around, when you're looking to change some of these APIs, there's got to be good reason for it, right? Like, what is the business value that it's going to drive if we make these changes to the APIs? Because then it becomes more of a maintenance nightmare and more expensive to the carrier ultimately to support these different APIs.
Well, to be honest, that's been my whole argument from an IBAC perspective is when you're moving data back and forth, there's really no competitive advantage to the movement of it, right? And you should just be as efficient as humanly possible. And copying A to B to C to D is the most efficient, right? Anybody who's copy pasted stuff knows it's way faster than typing it out again.
As a purist, I hope everyone kind of has that similar view. Though certainly once you get inside an organization and kind of understand some of the standards that they've built and some of the technologies that they've adopted and invested several of millions of dollars into, it becomes a bit more challenging question as to why are you forcing the standard down us, right? But to your point, Tom, like,
one of the things we'd like to see with Guidewire, and we've talked to Guidewire from our IBAC perspective, is they should be baking the CZO standards right into Guidewire and making sure they're current. And I feel like some of the Guidewire hasn't updated some of their stuff, and they're not as current with CZO as they should be, and that's caused some of the problem. Like, they're adopting old standards, don't realize they're doing it. So is it the carrier that's a problem? Is it you, the consultant, that's causing it? Or is it Guidewire? There's a combination of both where these things are falling between the cracks.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, right? I think some of the challenges that I would say is the platforms and the versions of Guidewire that carriers use are different, right? The product offerings, while, in today's world for some of the regulated lines should be the same, they're not, right? So now you've got these different versions of Guidewire, different versions of the product that now may not necessarily align to one version of the CZO standards. And while, the aim is to get everyone current and bring them up to the latest, like I know the new CZO standard that they're looking to move everyone to is coming out later this year or early next year. Making the business case for a carrier to say, okay, we need to update the latest version of CZO becomes a bit of a challenge, right? Because, how would they explain that to their leadership and their sponsorship to say, we're going to make this technology change. It's certainly going to have a benefit in terms of maintenance of the system and, the broker experience. It's just putting dollars to that. It becomes more of a challenge, right? But I think it's,
Well, I'm just going to kind of a second point. I think you brought up some interesting points there. I'm Juan Wanisa. I'm one of the first, maybe the first insurance company on the cloud. I believe maybe they are in North America or maybe ever. And all of a sudden a new version of CZO comes out. Wouldn't it be like I get a Windows, I do an upgrade, or on Applied Systems, we have different versions. It's pushed out, we're paying a support fee. Doesn't that work the same way for Guidewire? And same of these insurance farm mutuals on, I call it Guidewire Lite because it's a light version, but you should be able to push everything down and update that. Is that not how it works? Or is it they have to spend thousands of dollars in consulting fees, remap everything? Maybe explain us how this update would work.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the former of that, right? So, and it happens not just with the CZO side, it's also, with other integrations like HCI. As we understand these updates, they are consumed by the downstream carriers, but it also needs to be prioritized in terms of all the other initiatives, right? Because there isn't an unlimited or, pool of resources that can adopt these changes and push them out, right? Because as part of those changes, mapping is just step one of it, right? To understand where the gaps are, right? But then there's the development, the testing, and the regression piece that goes along with it. And trying to align that across all the carriers becomes very challenging, especially when there's other competing initiatives, right? But certainly we'd love to get to a point where as soon as a standard comes out, all the underlying platforms as well as the BMS systems adopt those standards so that they can be on one consistent view of the messages flowing back across all the different service types. The challenge, though, Jeff and everyone else, is everyone's at a different point in their journey with different versions of the underlying platform that it makes it difficult to consume in a single standard across all of the carriers at the same time.
So are you saying we're screwed, or are you saying that there's...
No. And again, not, the benefit of Guidewire Cloud now, and I don't know if you guys have worked, kind of understand the new methodology with Guidewire Cloud is as customers move to Guidewire Cloud, they need to be within 1 or 2x versions of the latest cloud release. So Guidewire will be pushing standard versions of their cloud release. There's 3 releases every year. Every carrier needs to be, I think, N-2 on the latest release. So that will at least allow every carrier to be on the same version of the underlying platform, which will allow you to adopt the same set of standards, right? Before, in the previous on-prem world, someone could be on version 5 of Guidewire, someone could be on version 7, version 10, and that was probably the reason why Guidewire decided to move to this cloud offering so that everyone can be on the same version at the same time.
I look at things like the Guidewire Marketplace and some of these sort of third-party tools. Have you guys ever considered turning connectivity into something like that, like maybe externalizing? So there's one way of doing it, and then it communicates to all the plethora of back-end systems, so that there's not 15 different ways of implementing the same thing. There's one way.
Yeah, it's a good question, Tom, because and actually quite timely. So one of the latest releases of Guidewire Cloud has now mandated that all interactions are done through their new integration framework, right? So it's a mechanism to decouple their integrations from the core system. So you can actually make changes to your integrations without having to deploy new features or capabilities as part of the core platform. So with that mandate, everyone is going to have to adopt the integration gateway as they move on to Guidewire Cloud in the near future. And so all of their integrations, all third-party integrations, even for some of their internal integrations like financial integrations, are now going to be ported over to the integration gateway. And they're making an investment to make those available into Marketplace. So broker connectivity would be a prime example of where they're going to be posting that onto Marketplace, where everyone can leverage the same version of code on that version of Guidewire Cloud.
So you're talking about sharing. Do you know about the Wawanesa API sharing project?
Yeah, we've had some initial discussions. We don't work directly with Wawanesa, but I've heard that they've now taken some of the APIs that are going to be publishing that available on Marketplace or Go.
They are available. Yeah. So the work that they've done, they've graciously shared with basically the industry to say, hey, let's not replicate and replicate costs as well as efforts. We've done this. You can have that. There's no secret sauce here, but in order to progress the industry further. So is E&Y working with, other industry players with respect to that?
We are. So, for all the implementations, we've been reusing our set of API assets for broker connectivity and working with Guidewire to actually make those publicly available as part of Marketplace in the near future. We haven't seen exactly, compared how ours differ from the Wawanesa set, but, it's the same set of upload capabilities, download, inquiry capabilities. So we're working with all of our clients to make sure that those are standard and available for future customers as well. There may be an amalgamation between those APIs and what Wawanesa has published as well. We just haven't had those conversations at this point.
So there's lots of APIs out there and a lot of people working on them. My question would be, who do you see as who's the biggest challenge to overcome insofar as creating broker connectivity?
I think it's timing, right? So we, as an example, we were working with another carrier several years back. And we were, as part of their transformation journey, they were looking to enable broker connectivity for a modern platform like Guidewire. And the challenges that we faced there is they wanted full API capabilities, so to be able to do a policy change, to be able to do a cancellation, to do a rewrite. The limitation there was, the cost for the BMS systems to provide that capabilities was much higher than everyone anticipated.
Oh, well, wait, I need some clarity there. The cost for or from the BMS systems?
Cost for the BMS. So working with the BMS systems to align on the development effort to enable that. So Guidewire in itself, in most modern platforms, they have the APIs to do a policy change and all those capabilities. The BMS system, though, had to build some of those capabilities to do that and push that downstream, right? So it was more around alignment with the broker management systems to make sure that they've got the capacity and the resources to be able to build that set of connectivity.
Or do they just charge the insurer for that connectivity? If we have to do this work, it's going to cost you X.
Right. Yeah. Sorry.
So that's the way it works. It's not cost for the BMS. It's cost from the BMS.
From the BMS. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, okay. We need to be clear on that.
Yeah. No. Good call out. Yeah. So no, It would be the cost to the carrier from the BMS.
From the BMS. Okay. So that's why we don't have connectivity, Tom.
Yeah. And I think that is one of the reasons why. So I'm going to very briefly defend the BMS vendors. Where, I know, but don't worry. I'll come back to the point. So when you're a BMS vendor or any vendor, and you have many, many people coming to you saying, here's my CSIO compliant API, here's my CSIO compliant API, and you look at them and they're all different. So now you have to develop and maintain, by the way, which is difficult because you're not just maintaining a bunch of transactions, you're maintaining a bunch of previous iterations of those transactions, right? So I got to have the current one and then the N-1 and N-2 and N-3, whatever, times the number of carriers, times the number of transactions. So you've got hundreds of APIs to maintain from a vendor perspective because they're all different, right? So there is a legitimately higher cost to them. Now, if the carriers got together and all shared the these APIs, or if EY, was to use a super similar version of that, or there was some meeting of the minds and we had critical mass, so so that whole argument for the vendor goes away because now it's just one set of APIs, not every carrier's set of APIs. It's still not cheap or easy because there's a bunch of them and you got to maintain multiple versions or whatever, but it goes down by at least an order of magnitude, right? So it comes back to critical mass. If there's a critical mass of Guidewire specific APIs, whether they've been sourced through Guidewire or through Awanisa or whoever, that is the outcome we're looking for, in my opinion. Or that's the step we're looking for, because the outcome we're looking for is start and stop at the BMS, less expenses, all kind of stuff. But the way to get there, in my opinion, always comes back to we need 100% as close as possible consistency between different carriers' APIs and how they look and how they react.
So we're all part of the problem. We're all part of the solution. That's what we're basically saying, right? Like everybody's got a role to play, right?
It's an industry, right? But I think as long as, in my opinion, I'm going to get off my soapbox shortly, but in my opinion, the reason why we ask Shawn questions about, how consistent are your APIs, and we say, hey, well, we need to share in their APIs because we're all getting to that point where we need a critical mass of carriers and vendors who are using, one common set of APIs and no, different versions. I mean, minor variations, sure, here and there, but it's got to be the same. At the end of the day, it's not you're doing a cancellation. Like, why is it different? Like, it shouldn't be different. It's different because people didn't work together on it.
And if everybody, basically, Shawn said, if everybody gets in the same version of Guidewire, they get in the cloud, this is going to be so much easier to pivot and adjust than what's going on right now. It's a whole pivotal shift, right?
The cool thing is you don't even need the same version of Guidewire, right? If there's like what Shawn was talking about a minute ago about externalizing the API so that it's actually separate from your underlying Guidewire, or shit, it could be Duck Creek or Chameleon at that point. Like that API interface is the only thing the vendors see. They don't at that point have to care about what's in the back end.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying, like I said, if they are on the same version, it's going to be a lot easier to consume, right? Hey, quick question when we're kind of on the carrier thing. Maybe run us by, like, I want to go to the cloud. I'm a fairly big carrier that does, say, $1 billion of business, and I'm 4 versions behind. What time commitment is that for a normal person to handle, or a normal company, and what's involved in making that happen?
Yeah, I mean, depending on the size and the complexity of the client, it can vary, right? It could take anywhere 6 months. It could take 2 years, right? It really depends on the level of customization that the client has, introduced in terms of their current stack of Guidewire, right? So I'll tell you right up front, if a customer's on version 5 and they're looking to go to cloud, well, it's going to take them much longer than someone's on version 10 that's looking to go to Guidewire Cloud. So as part of the process, Guidewire comes in and they do a bit of an assessment. So they look at all kind of the, I don't want to say problematic, but highly customized areas of their current platform and say, okay, for these customized areas, you're going to have to remediate them by doing X, Y, and Z. For these areas of the platform that you've customized, where you can replace it with this new capability within Guidewire Cloud, that's not going to require any implementation. It's going to probably be more of a data migration effort, right? So that's the key point, right? The initial assessment to understand how highly customized is their current instance and their willingness to unwind some of those customizations to take advantage of the new features with Guidewire Cloud. And so, it's, I don't want to say a specific timeline or dollar value, right? But it's that initial critical step that'll allow a customer to understand kind of what that implementation to cloud would typically look like.
What customizations make sense? Like, you've now sat at the sort of intersection here of easy rollout stock versus people doing wild amounts of proprietary customization. In your case, like, when do customizations make sense, knowing it's going to create a 2x 3x problem down the road trying to stay up to date?
And I struggle with this, right? Like, people say, what's customization versus configuration? In the end, it's development work that needs to be done, right? But, we'll categorize things that are going to have an impact on your ability to upgrade, your ability to sustain in the future as customizations, right? And so, what has been successful, for many carriers is establishing that design authority or some sort of governing body to evaluate any types of customizations that they're putting into their organization to, number one, engage kind of what is the business value that this is going to drive, or are they building it because, well, that's what they used to do in legacy. The latter there certainly is never a good reason to do so.
I would say in my experience, it's a fairly common one.
It is. It was, right? And depending on the maturity of the platform, right? Like 10 years ago, you probably had to do a lot more customization to Guidewire than you do now, right? Because they've built this laundry list of capabilities that they've now built back into the platform itself. So I don't think there's an easy way to evaluate, what's the right customization. You just need to go into eyes wide open to understand, what is the additional cost or total cost of ownership later down the road to maintain that capability. And at this point in time, insurance isn't changing, drastically, right? Like maybe new products and new coverage offerings, right? But we shouldn't have to, reinvent how we do out of sequence endorsements or how we do, Tom, you said it yourself, right? Like a cancellation is a cancellation, right? So why are you even considering customizing that flow? Do you think it's going to provide a better user experience? Is it going to improve your operations? Like, I think there has to be some well thought out and guiding principles along set up well in advance of these implementations to help make better decisions as you're going through a big transformation.
There's one question missing too, is what is this going to do to the broker's workflow? Are we adding minutes or taking away minutes?
Lateral did nothing but redid the back end.
Sometimes did nothing is a win for the broker.
Yeah. What the other thing too is tell me about Guidewire Marketplace. We kind of got exposed to that when we were at the CBN meeting in Montreal about all the really cool off-the-shelf products that I'm like, wow, this is great.
Yeah, I mean, like that's the first stop, right? When a new capability comes up, whether it's a new integration or new capability to the platform, the first question we always ask or we're asked by our customers is this something that's already been done at another carrier or is it available on Marketplace, right? So the more sharing of those capabilities and features on Marketplace or Guidewire Go will allow and minimize the amount of customizations. And certainly if there's things on Marketplace that has a lot of traction, Guidewire is, with cloud, with the 3 releases every year, they're looking to build in new capabilities and features, right? So some of those Marketplace additions actually find its way back into the core product, right? So it doesn't become a marketplace. It's just their stock out of the box, right? So certainly, Jeff, I think marketplace is one of those areas that helps eliminate the amount of customizations that carriers may think about doing in the future, but it also creates a broader awareness for new capabilities that carriers should be thinking about. And I think having a broker council or community, to just share their experiences, right? There's the brokers that are working with APIs directly from their system into carrier systems. There's brokers that are working directly in Guidewire because they launch into it. Getting some of that feedback and kind of, transforming that into assets on marketplace would be a hugely valuable exercise.
So let's pivot into the next angle, or what I want to ask is, it feels like nearly everyone has either rolled out Guidewire or is in the path of rolling out Guidewire. What's next? Where does EY go once Guidewire has been rolled up and legacy's been put to bed?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And there's, Guidewire in itself is going to continue to evolve, right? 10 years ago, we were talking about on-premise. Here we are 10 years later, we're in Guidewire Cloud. So Guidewire will continue to be, at least in my opinion, the dominant platform of choice. And with the new releases that are coming every year, there's going to be new features and capabilities that are going to require enablement, right? So we are, strategically placing our investments around future releases of Guidewire and how we can support that, right? So not only are we doing implementations, but we're also doing managed services, right? So we're helping carriers take in those releases, implement new features. But I think the next big thing for us is going to be data, right? And how are we going to leverage that data? Because up until now, data has been a bit of a joke in terms of some of these legacy platforms, developing insights, using that data to your, to be able to do proper risk assessments, to do proper loss assessments. It's just not there, right? But now with more structured data, with a modern platform like Guidewire, it's going to enable carriers to take advantage of the data and really accelerate more straight-through processing for various lines of business and different profiles of risks.
I think you bring a point that you acknowledged it. Thank you. That data sucks out of Guidewire. I asked my marketing reps, tell me where your rates.
That's what you were saying, Shawn?
No.
He didn't say that. He said the opposite of that.
Sorry. I apologize if that's how it was interpreted. No, with Guidewire. No. With Guidewire, you now have better and richer sets of data that you can actually discrete data fields that you can leverage and interpret, right? And so there may be challenges with the legacy way that Guidewire had provided data, but with their new change data capture that's included within Guidewire Cloud, you basically have access to every data element that's available in the core without having to make any type of investments or customizations. So you can actually get access to all the rich set of data.
Is there a way now with unstructured data using AI? I'm going to have to throw AI in here because we haven't talked about that yet, to look at the the phone calls that are coming in, like the tone of voice. Like if you saw what's been happening on claims the last 3 years about, the response to companies, the delay, having to follow up, there's a ton of friction and the process needs to be improved.
Yeah, I mean, that's the primary use case, when we talk about AI, right? And the call screening and intake and parsing that data into discrete fields in Guidewire. That's kind of the primary use case, Jeff. And so being able to discern the tone or the emotion of the caller is probably one of the most key use cases that they're going to be pushing out on the claims perspective, right? Because now a caller an adjuster or whoever is intaking the call, rather than focusing on typing in all that information across different, screens within Guidewire, they're actually can be a bit more empathetic to and spend more time with the caller themselves and let all the tedious work be done by the AI piece of it, right? Which will ultimately lead to a better claims experience.
Why do brokers need BMS? There's a little whiplash, but like if Guidewire's got the straight through path to all of this thing, why don't they whip up a light version of a broker CRM?
I think that they specifically, look where they're going to make investments based on kind of the broader regions, right? And so while there are, in the Canadian market, it's very broker heavy, in the U.S. market, maybe not as much, right? And so they look at their investments to see what kind of regional coverage it's going to have. Certainly, we've asked the question, like is there a broker solution available from Guidewire, or is there any investments being done there? It's just, what's the ROI for them on that?
Maybe Shawn, give us your 5 to 10 year crystal ball. Like, what is going to be happening with insurance technology in Canada? Where's with AI and Guidewire and connectivity and all this stuff? Where are we going to be 5, 10 years down the road?
Hopefully, we still all have jobs. Number one. Number two, certainly, you look at insurance companies, like certainly product offerings are going to evolve, right, based on the needs and the demands of the market. So tools like Guidewire and other capabilities are going to be able to adopt. Most carriers are looking at how can they get to speed to market faster with new product offerings, right, because of the ever-changing landscape of insurance. Number two, straight through processing, I think it's been almost like a mediocre rise over the last 10 years. Like, we haven't seen the uptick that we've been hoping, because it's been largely, you needed a human to actually build out those capabilities, analyze the data and kind of build those capabilities. And so being able to rapidly test and validate those hypotheses have been a fairly long journey, right? But with the introduction of AI, you're going to be able to litmus test many of these use cases very quickly and enable them, right? So I think you're going to see a spike in straight through processing across both the policy and claims value chain. And then really, from a consumer perspective, being able to identify and get quotes more rapidly rather than having to go to 10 different websites. I think, we're going to know very quickly, like through cross-selling and embedded insurance, who our providers are going to be almost very quickly, right? And so we are working with a number of, non-insurance based entities to see what their approach is to embedded insurance, right? So this can be automotive dealers, this can be other retailers in the market. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that than your traditional shopping of insurance, as we're doing today for at least personal commercial insurance.
Is retention important to your brokerage? Of course it is. That's why at IFS, we have a cancellation prevention process. Want more details? Give us a call. I know you don't always use a premium finance company, but when you do, you should use IFS. Cheers.